The day she finished her residency, she handed me divorce papers and told me I was a phase she had outgrown. I signed them on the hood of my truck, handed them back, and drove away before the ink was dry. No argument, no scene, no begging, just my signature and the sound of the engine. 7 years. That number means something when you actually count what it cost. 7 years of picking up extra shifts at the shop, so her tuition never bounced. 7 years of eating whatever was left in the fridge after she studied through dinner and forgot I existed. 7 years of watching my own plans, the business I had sketched out on a napkin in our second year together, sit in a drawer while I made sure hers didn't fall apart. I worked the floor at a jewelry wholesaler in Boston South End, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She was in her first year of medical school. The deal we never officially made, but both understood was simple. She gets through school, I hold things together, and then we build something together on the other side. I believe that. For 7 years, I believed it. The morning she matched to her residency program, I took her to breakfast at a place on Newberry Street she had been wanting to try. She ordered the Eggs Benedict, checked her phone twice before the food arrived, and told me the program was going to be intense. I told her I knew, and that I had her back. She smiled the way people smile when they've already moved on from the conversation. I missed that. I filed it away without understanding what I was filing. The residency years changed the texture of everything. The hours got longer. The calls got shorter. She stopped asking about the shop, stopped asking about anything outside the hospital walls. I told myself it was the pressure. I told myself she was exhausted. I built explanations for things I should have examined more carefully. Her attending, a cardiothoracic surgeon named Dr. Hartman, became a name I heard constantly. Then a presence I never saw. Then a silence she developed whenever I asked a direct question. I noticed. I said nothing. The graduation ceremony was at a hotel in the Back Bay on a Saturday in June. She walked across the stage, and the room applauded, and I sat in the third row thinking that this was the moment we had worked toward. This was the other side of the deal. She found me in the lobby afterward, not with her arms around me, but with an envelope. "I need you to look at these," she said. I opened it standing there in the middle of the lobby while people in suits walked past with champagne glasses. Divorce papers. Clean, formal, already organized with tabs marking where I needed to sign. "I've had these ready for 3 weeks," she said. I didn't want to disrupt the last stretch of the program. I looked at her. 3 weeks. "You're a good person," she said, and her voice had the controlled warmth of someone delivering difficult news to a patient. "But I think we both know you were more of a chapter than a destination. I needed someone steady while I built this. That's what you were. You were a phase I had to go through to get here." She said it without flinching, like it was a medical assessment. Accurate, clinical, delivered and done. I looked at the papers. I looked at her. I pulled a pen from my jacket pocket. I always carry one, and signed every page right there in the lobby. Handed the envelope back. "Good luck with the career," I said, and I walked out. My truck was parked 2 blocks away on Boylston. I sat in it for maybe 4 minutes. Not crying, not spiraling, just thinking about the next move, the way you think about it when the previous one is already closed behind you. I had a storage unit in Alston with boxes I had quietly packed over the previous 2 months. Not because I knew this was coming, but because something in me had stopped unpacking things the way I used to. Some part of me had been preparing without telling the rest. I called my cousin Caleb that night. He picked up on the second ring. "It happened," I said. He already knew what I meant. "Where are you going?" I had been looking at Seattle for 3 months. The jewelry business I had sketched on that napkin years ago, sterling silver, handmade, starting small, had a better market there than I had in Boston. Lower overhead, a different kind of customer, and it was as far from the Back Bay as I could get without leaving the country. "West," I said. Caleb was quiet for a second. "When?" "Monday." He didn't try to talk me out of it. That's why I called him. I left Boston on a Monday morning in a Ford F-150 with 140,000 miles on it, and everything I owned loaded in the bed and a storage trailer hitched behind. No farewell dinners, no announcement. I forwarded my mail to a P.O. box in Seattle, changed my number, and deleted the social media accounts I had let go dormant anyway. She was probably at brunch somewhere celebrating. I drove west on a 90 with a large Gatorade in the cup holder and nothing pulling me back. What she didn't know, what she had no reason to think about on the morning of her celebration, was that the man she had described as a phase had just stopped being available entirely. Not angry, not broken, just gone. And gone, it turns out, is a very different thing from waiting. I pulled into Seattle on a Thursday evening just before the city lost its light. The skyline came up slow over the ridge on I-90, gray water, gray sky, the kind of place that doesn't try to impress you and somehow impresses you anyway. I had a week-to-week room in a house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. A guy named Emmett rented out the upper floor, retired electrician, kept to himself, had a coffee maker that ran at 5 o'clock in the morning without fail. The room was small, the window faced a cedar fence, and it cost less per month than my share of the Boston utilities used to. It was exactly what I needed. The napkin sketch from 6 years ago was still in my jacket pocket. Not the same jacket, not the same napkin, but I had redrawn it so many times over the years that it had become a fixed thing in my head. Clean and specific. Sterling silver, handmade, starred with rings and cuffs, the kind of pieces that work for both men and women, nothing gendered, nothing seasonal. Price point between $40 and $90. Farmers markets and pop-up events to start. Online store running parallel. Keep overhead at zero for as long as possible. In Boston, that plan had no room. Every dollar I made went to tuition installments, rent on an apartment that was her taste, not mine, and the kind of slow financial erosion that happens when two people share a life but only one of them is investing in the future. I had done the math once, late one night, when she was on a double shift, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a beer and too much time to think. 7 years. The number I came up with, what I had put in directly and indirectly toward her education and her stability, sat in my head for a long time after that. I closed the notebook. I never mentioned it to her. That was the version of me she called a phase. There was something else she didn't know about. Something I had never told her because telling her would have made her feel obligated, and I didn't want that. I wanted her to succeed because she worked for it, not because she felt guilty. 18 months into her residency, I was contacted by a wholesale distributor out of Providence, a mid-sized company that imported raw gemstones and semi-precious materials. They had seen some pieces I had made for a co-worker's wedding and wanted to talk about a supply partnership. Not huge, but enough to be a real start. The timing was wrong. She was in the hardest stretch of the program. 2 residents in her cohort had already dropped out. She was sleeping 4 hours a night and calling me less and less, and the calls she did make were tense and tired. I told the distributor I needed more time. He gave me 60 days. At the end of 60 days, I asked for another 30. He moved on. I wrote about it once in a letter I never sent. Not to her, to myself mostly. Something I used to do when I needed to think clearly without talking to anyone. I folded it, put it in an envelope, and tucked it inside a box of old documents I had been carrying since my first apartment. It moved with me every time I moved. It came with me to Seattle. She never knew the opportunity existed. She never knew I buried it. My first week in Seattle, I drove the neighborhoods. Pike Place, Capitol Hill, Ballard, Pioneer Square. I was looking at foot traffic, at the kind of people who stopped to look at handmade things versus the kind who walked past. I was listening to the market before I said anything to it. By the end of week 2, I had a spot at a weekend market in Fremont. A 6-foot table, a black cloth, 43 pieces I had made in the evenings using tools I had packed in a hard case in the truck bed. I had been making pieces in stolen hours for years. Lunch breaks, late nights, Sundays when she was at the hospital, building inventory without a plan to use it. Now I had a plan. The first weekend, I sold 11 pieces, covered the table fee, and bought materials for 20 more. The second weekend, I sold 19. A woman named Leah, who ran the booth next to mine selling hand-dyed scarves, watched me pack up at the end of the second day and said, "You're going to need a bigger table soon." I told her I was working on it. Back in Boston, the celebration she had planned for herself was already running its course. I know this because Caleb had a mutual contact, a woman named Evelyn who had been friendly with both of us over the years and had no reason to filter what she mentioned in passing. She wasn't gossiping. She was just talking. The attending, Dr. Hartman, had not left his wife. That detail landed somewhere behind the celebration, quiet and specific. The position she had been expecting at Mass General came through at a lower rank than anticipated, with a salary that, after loan payments, left less room than the title suggested. The apartment she had taken alone in the South and felt more visible once there was no secondary income absorbing part of the cost. None of that was my concern. I had signed the papers. I had driven away. What happened in that apartment after I left was her architecture to manage, but I noted the way you note weather patterns, not because you cause them, but because they tell you something about what's coming. 3 months into Seattle, I moved out of Emmett's rental and into a 2-bedroom place in Columbia City that I shared with a guy named Boyd, mid-30s. Worked in logistics, kept the kitchen clean, and asked no questions. The second bedroom was mine. I turned the small room off the kitchen into a workspace. The business had a name by then, a bank account, a website with 12 product photos. I took myself against a piece of white foam board propped against the window on a Sunday morning. It wasn't much yet, but it was mine. Every piece of it was mine. And for the first time in 7 years, that mattered more than I had expected it to. 6 months after Boston, the business had outgrown the weekend market table, and I hadn't hired anyone yet. I was doing everything: production, photography, shipping, customer messages, inventory. Waking up at 5 o'clock, working the bench until noon, packing orders in the afternoon, back at the bench in the evening. Boyd would knock on the workshop door sometimes and leave a coffee on the floor outside without saying anything. That kind of roommate is worth keeping. The silver line was steady. Rings, cuffs, pendant necklaces with clean geometric cuts. Nothing ornate. Nothing that needed explaining. The kind of piece someone picks up, turns over once, and puts on before they leave the market. I had stopped doing markets by month 5 and moved everything online. A woman named Chloe, who handled social content for a few small makers in the area, reached out after finding the site through a mutual vendor. She offered to shoot a proper product set in exchange for a flat fee and a few pieces. I said yes. 2 weeks after those photos went live, monthly revenue doubled. I reinvested everything. No lifestyle upgrade, no celebration dinner, just materials, better tools, and a proper light setup for the workshop. In Boston, the picture looked different. Evelyn mentioned things without meaning to, the way people do when they assume you've moved on enough to hear them neutrally. The position at the hospital was more demanding than anticipated. Longer rotations, political dynamics in the department she hadn't expected, a senior surgeon in her unit who made the environment difficult for newer attendings. The loan payments were fixed. The South End rent was not negotiable without breaking a lease. Dr. Hartman, who she had orbited for the better part of 2 years, had made his position clear sometime around month 3 post-graduation. He valued her professionally and intended to keep it that way. She had built a life around a version of things that hadn't materialized. The status was there, the title, the coat, the salary that looked impressive on paper, but the actual texture of the days was something else entirely. 12-hour shifts followed by an empty apartment, takeout containers on the counter, no one asking how the case went. I'm not saying this with any satisfaction. I'm saying it because it's what happened, and because it matters for what came later. Around the 8-month mark, I started working with gold. Not a pivot, an expansion. A small line of 14-karat pieces, higher price point, lower volume, different customer. The margins were better. The craft required more precision, which I found I didn't mind. Caleb came out of Seattle for a long weekend in October. He walked into the workshop, looked at the bench, looked at the shelves of finished inventory, and said, "You look like yourself." I asked him what that meant. "I don't know," he said. "You just do." We went to a sports bar near the waterfront on Saturday night to watch a game. He had a beer, I had a Gatorade. I've been keeping my head clear on production weeks, and we talked about the business for a while and then stopped talking about it, which is what you do when things are actually going well. No need to analyze it to death. Before he flew back, he asked me if I ever thought about her. I told him the truth. Less than you'd expect. He nodded like that was the right answer. Maybe it was. The moment that changed the scale of everything happened on a Tuesday in November, about 10 months in. A fashion influencer named Willow Price, mid-size following, strong engagement, known for a clean aesthetic that leaned toward independent makers, posted a photo wearing one of the gold cuffs. No tag, no paid arrangement. She had bought it through the site 2 weeks earlier. The caption mentioned the brand by name and said something about the craftsmanship that I won't repeat because it would sound like I'm quoting a review of myself, which I'm not going to do. The site crashed inside of 4 hours. By the time I got the hosting issue resolved, there were over 300 orders in the queue. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and worked out the math on materials, production time, and realistic shipping windows. Then I called a jeweler I had met at the Fremont Market months earlier, a guy named Logan who did restoration work, and had mentioned he was looking for consistent contract hours and asked if he wanted to come in 3 days a week. He said yes before I finished the sentence. The Willow Price post opened a door that led to another door. A manager who handled merchandise for a rapper named Christopher McLaughlin, mid-level, genuine following, the kind of artist who still cared about what the product actually was, reached out 6 weeks after the post went viral. McLaughlin wanted a custom chain and cuff set for a video shoot with the option to co-brand a limited run if the pieces worked. I drove to a meeting in Capitol Hill on a Wednesday morning with a portfolio case and the 2 sample pieces I had made based on a brief his manager sent over. McLaughlin was at the table. He picked up the cuff, turned it, put it on, looked at it for about 10 seconds. "This is it," he said. The co-branded run sold out in 72 hours. After that, the business wasn't a workshop operation anymore. It was a company. I moved the production space out of the Columbia City house and into a small commercial unit in SoDo. Hired a part-time assistant for logistics. Opened a wholesale account with 2 boutiques in Capitol Hill and 1 in Portland. I called Caleb on a Friday evening after signing the lease on the new space. He picked up and I told him what happened. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "She has no idea, does she?" It wasn't a question. "No," I said, "she doesn't." She tried to reach me for the first time around month 11, an email to an address I no longer used. I only know this because it bounced back to Evelyn, who had been copied on something years ago and somehow still had the thread. Evelyn mentioned it, again, without meaning to, during a call about something else entirely. The subject line of the email, as Evelyn described it, was simple. "I just want to talk." I didn't respond. There was no address to respond to, technically. But even if there had been, I wouldn't have. I was in the middle of building something, and nothing about that email changed the direction I was already moving. By the time the second year began, the business had a name that people recognized without me having to explain it. Not famous, but known. There is a difference, and the difference matters when you're trying to build something that lasts rather than something that peaks. The Soto unit had a second bench now. Logan was full-time. I had brought in a woman named Kinsley to handle wholesale accounts and the boutique relationships. Organized, direct, no patience for vague conversations, which meant she was exactly right for the job. The online store ran on a schedule, limited drops, controlled inventory. Scarcity by design, not by accident. Revenue had crossed a number I had written on that napkin years ago as a 5-year goal. We hit it in 14 months. I moved out of the Columbia City house and into a 2-bedroom unit in Madison Valley. My own place, no roommate. Clean lines, good light, a spare room I used as a secondary workspace for prototyping. Nothing excessive, but mine, entirely mine, down to the lease. Midday calls with Kinsley or the boutique buyers. 2 evenings a week at a driving range in Bellevue, where I had picked up golf with the particular indifference of someone who does it for the silence rather than the score. On weekends when production allowed, I had started doing basic woodworking in the building's ground floor workshop, a shared space for residents that almost nobody used. Cutting boards, small shelving units, nothing significant, just the kind of work that keeps your hands honest when the rest of your day is about numbers and emails. I had also met someone. Her name was Emery. She worked in architectural preservation, old buildings, restoration assessments, the kind of work that requires patience and a tolerance for things that take years to show results. We had met through Chloe, the content photographer, at a dinner that was not intended to be anything other than dinner. Emery was straightforward. She said what she meant, asked questions when she didn't understand something, and had no interest in performing a version of herself for anyone's benefit. On our 3rd time spending time together, she asked me directly why I had left Boston. I told her the short version. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That's a long time to carry someone else's future." Not pity, just observation. I appreciated the difference. We were not in a rush. Neither of us pushed the pace. But by month 16 in Seattle, she was a consistent presence. Dinner twice a week, weekend mornings at the farmer's market in Capitol Hill, the kind of rhythm that builds without announcement. What she brought to my day was straightforward. She was present when she was there and absent when she wasn't, and neither required management. That sounds simple. After 7 years of the alternative, it was the most valuable thing I had encountered. In Boston, the attempt to reach me had escalated past email. She had found a number connected to the business, not my direct line, the general inquiry contact on the website, and left a message with Kinsley that was professional in framing, but specific enough in detail that Kinsley walked into the Soto unit on a Wednesday afternoon, set her notes on the bench, and said someone called the inquiry line asking for you by name. Said she was an old friend. Left a Boston area code. I looked at the number, recognized it immediately, said nothing for a moment. "Do you want me to call back?" Kinsley asked. "No," I said, "log it and move on." She did. That was the end of it from my side. What I learned later, through Evelyn, through the slow drip of information that comes when you share a social perimeter with someone even after you've left it, was that the year had been difficult for her in ways that went beyond finances. The surgeon she had aligned herself with during residency had by now made a lateral move to a hospital in Philadelphia, taking his professional network and whatever informal mentorship she had been counting on with him. The department she was in had restructured, which meant a new hierarchy and a new set of relationships to navigate from the bottom of a seniority list she had assumed she would climb faster. She had started seeing someone in the fall, an emergency medicine physician, divorced, 2 kids on alternate weekends. The relationship lasted about 4 months. He ended it in January in a conversation that, as Evelyn described it with the careful neutrality of someone repeating something they weren't sure they should, had been brief and logistical. He had said something about incompatibility, about needing someone who was actually available, about the way she was present in a room without really being there. Evelyn said she had taken it harder than expected. I thought about that for a moment after the call, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to recognition. Those were not new complaints. They were just complaints that someone else was making now. She went back to Boston for a long weekend in February to visit her mother, a woman named Ruth who had always been cordial to me and whose opinion of the divorce I had never asked for and never received. Evelyn heard from Ruth directly, which is how this particular detail traveled. At some point during the visit, she had gone through a storage closet looking for something, tax documents, her mother said, something practical, and had found a box, a moving box with her name on it in my handwriting. Things I had packed when we were together that she had never unpacked or had unpacked and repacked without looking at. Old photographs, a few books, some paperwork, and a small envelope sealed with no name on the outside, just a date written in the corner in my handwriting. A date from about 18 months into her residency. Ruth said she sat with it for a long time before opening it. I didn't know the box was there. I hadn't thought about that letter in over a year. I had written it at the kitchen table on a night when I was tired and honest with myself in the way you only get when no one is watching, and I had sealed it because there was no one to send it to, just a record of where I was and what I had chosen and why. She read it. Evelyn didn't know exactly what was in it. Ruth hadn't shared the contents. She had only said that her daughter had gone very quiet for the rest of the evening and had driven back to Boston the next morning without finishing the visit. I found out about the letter in March, about 2 weeks before she found me. By then, the attempts to contact me had moved past the business line. She had reached out to Caleb, not aggressively, not dramatically, but directly. A message asking if he had a way to reach me. Caleb called me the same evening. She found a letter, he said. I was quiet for a moment. I knew exactly which one. She wants to talk, he said. I know, I said. What do you want me to tell her? I thought about it for a few seconds, not long. The answer had actually been settled for a while. I just hadn't needed to say it out loud until now. Tell her I'm not available by phone, I said. If she has something to say, she knows where I am. I'm in it as a figure of speech. I didn't expect her to take it as an address. But that is exactly what she did. She showed up on a Friday morning in April. No call ahead, no message through Caleb. She had pulled my address from hospital intake records, a form I had filled out 2 years earlier at a clinic in Cambridge before Seattle, before any of this. She crossed state lines with a piece of paperwork from our old life and walked into the Soto unit at 9 o'clock in the morning like she still had standing to do that. Kinsley was at the front when she walked in. I was at the bench in the back. I heard Kinsley say, "Can I help you?" in the tone she reserves for people who arrive without appointments, and a few seconds later she appeared in the doorway. "Someone here for you. Says she knows you personally." I already knew who it was. I set down the piece I was working on, wiped my hands, and walked out. She had prepared for this. Good coat. Hair done. The posture of someone who had rehearsed the first 30 seconds. But she wasn't prepared for what the space looked like. The display cases, the shelving, Logan at the second bench, Kinsley back at her desk, the general weight of a functioning operation that had nothing to do with her. She took it in slowly. Then she looked at me. "You build all of this," she said. "What do you need?" I said. She adjusted. "I read the letter, the one from your mother's box. I know about the distributor from Providence. I know what you gave up." "Okay," I said. "I didn't know," she said. "I need you to understand that. I had no idea what you were carrying. I know you didn't. That's not an excuse." "No," I said, "it isn't." She stopped. The word landed flat, and she felt it. She tried again. "I'm not here to ask you to undo anything. I just needed to say to your face that I understand now what I had and what I did with it." There was genuine weight in that. I'm not going to pretend there wasn't. She had flown across the country, tracked down an address through a 2-year-old medical form, and walked into a room full of evidence that the man she had dismissed as a phase had built something without her. That takes something. I acknowledged it internally and said nothing about it out loud, because that was the entirety of what she was getting from me. The front door opened behind her. Emery came in with 2 coffees from the place on the corner, the way she did on Friday mornings when she wasn't on site. She had a set of restoration drawings tucked under her arm, and her hair still slightly damp from the morning. She clocked the situation in about 2 seconds, the woman she didn't recognize, the specific quality of silence in the room, and she didn't miss a step. She walked to the counter, set 1 coffee in front of Kinsley, then came to stand beside me. Natural, unhurried, not performing anything. She looked at me first. "I'll be in the back when you're done." Then she looked at my ex-wife with a polite, even expression of someone who has absolutely nothing to prove, and walked through to the workshop. The silence she left behind said more than anything I could have arranged. My ex-wife stood very still for a moment. Her eyes went to the doorway Emery had just walked through, then back to me. I watched the math happen on her face, the space, the operation, the woman who walked in like she belonged there, because she did. 2 years of a life I had built without looking back, standing in the same room as the person who had told me I was a chapter, not a destination. I see, she said quietly. Was there anything else? I said. She looked at me for a long moment, searching for something, a crack, an opening, some version of me that was still waiting. She didn't find it. That version had driven out of Boston on a Monday morning and hadn't looked back once. No, she said. I think I have everything I came for. She picked up her bag, buttoned her coat, and then, at the door, she stopped without turning around. You were never just a phase, she said. I was just too focused on where I was going to see what I was leaving behind. I let that sit in the air for a second. I know, I said. You should get to the airport. Seattle traffic on Fridays is no joke. The door closed behind her. Kinsley looked at her coffee. Logan kept working. Nobody said anything, which was the correct response. I walked back to the workshop. Emery was at the table, drawings spread out, coffee in hand. She didn't look up immediately. You good? She said. Yeah, I said. I sat down at the bench and picked up the piece I had set aside 20 minutes ago. Good, she said, and went back to her drawings. That was it. No debrief, no reassurance required, no scene to process, just two people in a room, each doing their work, the morning continuing exactly as it was supposed to. She had called me a phase she outgrew. She flew 3,000 miles to find out the phase had moved on so completely that there was no longer any version of her that fit inside it. Not a crack in the wall, not a door left unlocked, nothing. Just a man at his bench, a woman at her drawings, and a business running exactly the way it was built to run without her in it, without her name on any of it, without a single corner left that remembered she had ever been considered necessary. Some people spend years waiting for an apology that makes the pain worth it. I spent those same years building something that made the apology irrelevant. That, in the end, is the only answer that actually lands. The quote of the day: when someone dismisses your worth, you respond by becoming someone they can no longer access. You know that kid who rebels against his parents, leaves the house convinced he doesn't need them, and 3 years later shows up at the door because the world didn't work out quite the way he planned? That's basically what happened here, except she wasn't a kid. She was a surgeon, and the door she came back to was 3,000 miles away and already locked from the inside. She didn't come back because she missed him. Not first. She came back because the life she traded him for stopped delivering. The career was harder than expected. The people around her were emptier than expected. And that quiet support she had taken for granted for 7 years, the kind you only notice once it's completely gone, wasn't something she could just replace. That's how things tend to come back around. Not dramatic, not loud, just reality catching up slowly. Until one day you're standing in someone else's success story, realizing you wrote yourself out of it. Anyway, if this one got you thinking, leave a comment below. Hit the like button if you think you made the right call, and I'll see you in the next one.